All right. Well, it is just about the top of the hour. We're going to get started right away. Thanks for joining me, and I'm so glad you're here. This is going to be a fun session where we dive into planning your trip. This is one of my favorite things to talk about because I don't know about you, but when I dream at night, I am always on a trip. I'm always traveling. It is one of the just a hot button in my life. I love thinking about travel. I love planning. I love dreaming about where I want to go. And taking my trip last year was the fulfillment of so many dreams. I had actually kind of gotten to the point where I wondered if I would ever get over to Europe. I'm not very young anymore. And, life was happening. My children are growing up and, I got kids in college and I got grandchildren that are coming in. And I just started thinking that, am I so stuck where I am at? Am I ever going to get there? But we made the decision just to go. And I'm so glad we did. And so we leaped, we pushed the button, and I want to help you do that too. So if you've got your PDF guide, I want you to grab that. I want you to get out a pen, because we are going to start dreaming about where you want to go and getting you set up to take those first steps. So if you open your guide, I am going to share my screen because I have got this. Let me get this out of the way. I have got my PDF guide here. So 5 essentials for planning your epic pilgrimage. Let's move on. I want to start with essential number 1. I just want to dive right into this material. I'm conscious of your time, and I want to just keep this as efficient as we can. I could talk about this stuff all day, and I don't want to, so I want to make sure that I am using your time efficiently. But what I have discovered in planning all of this, there are so many ideas that it can be so overwhelming. Where in the world do you want to go? And so instead of just, I guess you could get out darts, throw them at the wall, decide where you want to go. And that's what some people do, and that's great. But to me, if you're going to be planning a pilgrimage, there needs to be a why behind where you're going. And so that is essential number 1. Why are you going? Because once you can distill your why, then so many other decisions will be easier to make. Everything will narrow. Instead of 1,000 decisions, you'll have maybe tens of decisions. And everything will line up and be cohesive. And the trip that you plan will be meaningful, will be purposeful, and you will be much more satisfied with what you come out with than just randomly going here and there. And so I'm on page 3 of your guide. And let's talk about pilgrimage specifically, because anyone can plan a vacation. But this guide is to help you dive a little deeper than that, to combine your faith with your travel. And so when we think about traveling and pilgrimage, people have been going on pilgrimage for literally thousands of years. Some great reasons, some not so great reasons. History always judges people by what they've done. But there is that longing that I want to talk about, that longing inside of us to put legs on our faith, to go out, to explore, to venture beyond the familiar in search of a little bit more. So why are you wanting to go? What part of your faith you're trying to grow? How does this relate to your walk with God? One of my favorite ways to think of pilgrimage is to think of going on a honeymoon with God. And that might sound really strange at first, but let's dive into that a little more. Why do people go on a honeymoon? Well, on a first honeymoon, it's to mark the start of their life together. And so in your spiritual life, if you're just beginning a spiritual life or you want to deepen that spiritual life, think of your pilgrimage as that honeymoon, that first time of coming away from the familiar to just really spend focused time on the other, on your beloved. Now, not only a first honeymoon, but people take second honeymoons. And why do people go on second honeymoons? If you are already on the road, if you're down through the years of your spiritual life, why would you want to go on a honeymoon with the Lord? Well, people could take a second honeymoon because they are marking a milestone, perhaps. Perhaps they are about to change their lifestyle. Maybe they're changing from one job to the next, maybe from one season to the next. I know for my husband and I, when we went last year, it was kind of like a second honeymoon. We were celebrating a really big anniversary, as well as we were anticipating the birth of our first grandchild. And we knew that it would be a little bit different to be leaving a grandchild behind. So we wanted to take this trip before she arrived. And that was a great mark. People take second honeymoons because they are finished with one season and going on to the next. Perhaps they're retiring. Perhaps they just want to work on their relationship. Maybe they're taking a second honeymoon to revive their romance. That's a great way. That's a great reason to go on pilgrimage, to revive your romance with the Lord, just to get away from the familiar. You know, they say that going on a honeymoon, a second honeymoon, is really good for your kids. And that's the same for a pilgrimage, because if you are in ministry, if you have a lot of people that you are mentoring or training or leading, to get away with the Lord, to reconnect with your beloved, it makes you a better leader. It makes you a better parent spiritually. So many reasons why. And I want you to have time to really think that through. Why are you going? And I've given you some ideas here in your guide to strengthen your faith, to seek God, to walk or to see the larger connection of the church. And when I went to Europe last year, I was just amazed at the beauty of the churches. You'd walk along the streets that were very plain and drab, but you would open a door to a church and it would just be the most beautiful, ornate, elaborate building. And I remember thinking, wow, you know, this was built for the glory of God. People come here. People still come here to connect with God. People around the world have been connecting with God for thousands of years. And I think I can get into my little rut where I only think of my faith. I only think of my faith family or my community. And when I get out into the world and I see people worshiping in many different ways, it broadens my perspective of the church, that the Lord really does love his people, and his church really is a worldwide church, and people have an intimate relationship with him all around the world, and seeing that just broadens your perspective. I know it did for me. And then most of all, it's just to set aside time, just dedicated time to be with the Lord, to get away from the distractions, the busyness of home, the familiarness of those surroundings, and get away so you can hear God in a different way. You may have a great relationship with God. You may hear him on a daily basis, but there is something about getting out of the familiar when you set yourself in unfamiliar territory, where you have to listen in a new way, and God can reveal a new part of him to you. There is so much to be gained from that. So let's take a minute. I want you to use this guide to brainstorm, okay? I'm on page 4 now. I've got that big space. I just want to give you a couple minutes, just to, maybe just even 30 seconds, 60 seconds, to start brainstorming. Why do you want to take this trip? Is it one of the reasons I mentioned, or is it something completely different? That is up to you. So take the time now, jot down those reasons. Don't judge the reasons, don't edit the reasons, just write down as many reasons as you can in the next minute or so why you want to go. All right. So obviously you can go a long way with that and continue if you need to later on, but we're going to move on in this webinar workshop just to keep going. All right. So essential number 2, Now that you have kind of an idea, you've started to think about why, and then the next step is to set the duration and season of the trip. So you think you know why. That's good. Now, how long can you spend? So pilgrimages over the centuries have been epic adventures, right? You would start out, maybe you'd get on a ship and you'd go to a different continent, and then you'd be on foot, and you'd be on foot for weeks and months until you reached your destination. That was part of the process, and many people still take pilgrimages that way. I think of the Camino. I think of the Via Francigena. There's really so many traditional pilgrimages that you can take. There's many, many through Great Britain. There's always the pilgrimage to Jerusalem. I don't know that many people can take that one on foot anymore, just because of the times that we live in and the dangers of the area. But traditionally, those pilgrimages were walking pilgrimages. Now, that's something that you can plan, and there's many, many guides for that as well. But for most of us, I would venture to say that we don't have months at our disposal to take for this pilgrimage. So you're going to have a set amount of time. Perhaps it's your vacation from your work. Maybe you've got 1 week. Maybe you've got 10 days, something like that. Maybe you've got 2 weeks. You need to think about how much of your open time are you going to spend traveling. And remember that the farther that you set out to go, the longer it takes to get there, and it takes time to get back. So you've got to build that into your trip. So that's the duration. And that's usually pretty easy to determine because of our life. We're kind of locked into a lifestyle that we have to adhere to. But think about the season that you want to go. And something that I think of when I think about the seasons is, how much do I want to interact with crowds? Now, if your part of your why is to meet other travelers, to be on the road with other pilgrims, then perhaps going during the high season is something you'd look forward to. You want to rub shoulders with other people who are traveling, and you'd like to get to know new people. Or on the other side, perhaps you want a pilgrimage that gets you away from people, that you want solitude, that you want quiet. And so you may want to pick a season that is not busy for tourists. Maybe it's the winter. Winter travel is a totally different option because it's usually much cheaper, and then the crowds are much less. Now you have to put up with weather probably. If you're in the northern hemisphere, it's going to be super cold. Usually the off seasons are the cold seasons, whatever part of the world that's in. And so if you don't mind the cold and you want to be alone, winter is a great time to travel. But my favorite time to travel is the in-between. They call it the shoulder seasons, either the spring or the fall. School is not quite out yet, so the families are not in full force out and at the tourist destinations. The weather is getting a little better. It's a little warmer. You know, I'm from Hawaii, and I'm not used to cold weather. So when my husband and I took our trip, it was in May. And I thought May was just perfect because we could travel with just a light jacket. We didn't have to bundle up. You can always travel a little bit lighter if you don't have to bring a bunch of winter clothes. And we were traveling with backpacks, so that was an important thing to consider. So just consider those options. If you want to avoid the crowds, you want to go a little bit cheaper, then you go on the off seasons. But if you want to immerse yourself with people and sights and sounds, you want warm weather, then you'll probably be traveling during the summer times in the Northern Hemisphere. So think about that. Take a moment, jot some thoughts down on your page. We're on page 5. And think about, how long will you have? And what is the season that you're looking to travel in? And again, please refer back to essential number 1, your why, because that will inform your next decision. So take a couple minutes, not even a couple minutes, a minute, and think over these things. Give you as much time on that, just because sometimes that our life constraints makes that a little easier decision. I've only got 5 days, I've only got 10 days. So you can jot that down. All right, well, on to essential number 3. Pick your route. All right, so now we're getting into the nitty-gritty. Now it's really getting fun. When I first started dreaming of my trip, I took a piece of paper and I wrote down every place I'd want to go. And of course, the list was quite long. And I only had so much time. Mark and I took 21 days on our trip. And so because of time constraints, I knew we couldn't do it all. So how do you pick where you're going to go? Well, there's a couple assumptions I want you to make before you really start narrowing this down. And the first assumption is, I have it on your guide here, is you cannot see it all in one trip. So don't assume that you will, and assume that you're going to come back. That, when I finally believed that this is not going to be my only trip, I will come back, it took so much pressure off having to get my bucket list items off, all done in one trip. Because if I did that, I would be running myself so ragged, I really would not enjoy where I was at. That alone cut my list in half of where I wanted to go. You can pick a region. You can pick, again, conferring back to your why. What destinations that you'd like to go support that why? All right, are you following an ancient pilgrim path? Are you traveling in Spain? Are you traveling in Italy? Are you traveling in Great Britain? Are you traveling in the Holy Land? That will determine your route. If you're taking a traditional pilgrimage, one that has been, people have been following for thousands of years, then the route is very set. But even in the Camino, there are more than 30 routes of the Camino. So you still have to pick where you want to go. But knowing you want to do the Camino takes you from the whole world to 30 routes. So we're whittling it down decision by decision here. Perhaps you're creating your own path. That's what I did on my trip. Is I went. We started in Rome. I knew I wanted to go to Assisi, so we rented a car, went to Assisi, drove up. We stayed in Tuscany. We went from Tuscany to the coast. We went to Lucca and Pisa, and then we went to the Italian Riviera. We stayed in Rapallo. It was so beautiful. And then we took a train to Milan, rented a car, and drove up to Lake Como. After Lake Como, then we went back to Milan and flew to Paris. Ended our trip in Paris and then came home. And that was our 21-day trip. So that's kind of how I routed it. I wanted it to flow, right? You don't want to be wasting time traversing, backtracking, anything like that. So you want to plot where you want to go on a map and see if you can draw a line that is, a little bit more organized, and that will save you time as well. Then you can think of your budget, because your budget might also mean that you have to limit where you're going to go. So you want all of those things to fit. And this will take some time. Like I said, I started with a big long list. I started with 21 different destinations, but I knew that I only had 21 days. And I didn't want to go from city to city to city. I didn't want to spend my whole time traveling. I wanted to spend some quality time in each destination. And so that really helped me eliminate where I wanted to go. And I would say that this is kind of leaking into the next essential, but make sure that you spend 2 nights in each location. I would say if you're just spending 1 night in a location, you won't be seeing that location. It will just be a stopover on to the next place. And that might happen, but don't expect to sightsee in that place if you only have 1 overnight. All right, so I'm going to give you a minute to think about where do you want to go. Start with the continent, then list the countries, and then list some cities. So think broad and start to narrow it down. And at this point, because we're not going to take a whole lot of time for this, is just begin to write the cities where you'd like to go. And then you can connect them, get a map out, connect the dots, determine where you will fly into, where you'll fly out of. It used to be that round trips really saved you money, but it doesn't seem to be that way anymore. And so the advice that I received, that I took, as well as fly into one major hub, fly out of your last major hub, so that you're not wasting time just getting back to where you started. right? That's a good tip. So you don't have to think of coming into a full circle. It can be a linear trip, right? And again, always refer back to your why. Just begin this process of writing down where you want to be, where you want to go. Moving on to essential number 4. Modes of transportation, accommodation, and activities. Now you've got a ballpark idea of where you're going to go, what your route will be. Of course, that's going to need honing, and you'll come back to it. This plan, once you have an idea, don't think that it's set in stone until you're ready to actually purchase those tickets, because as you research, as you consider more options, things might change. And think of it as just a draft, okay? Because you're going to keep editing as you go through and as you get more, hone those clarified ideas, right? So let's think about the modes of transportation. I live in the most remote area of the planet, geographically. Now I'm plugged in with the internet, thankfully. I have mail service, we have shipping and all of that. But as far as remoteness of location, Hawaii is the most remote place in the world. So for me, my trips always have to start with air travel. Now they could start with ocean travel, but at this point in my life, I don't have that luxury of time. And so my mode of transportation, my first mode is always airlines. Depending on where you are, that could take, a couple hours or a couple days to get where you want to go. So that's my first mode of transportation. But once I get to my first city, then I need to decide how I want to move around. So like I kind of mentioned before, is this a walking pilgrimage? Is this something that you're just going to set off with your backpack and your walking shoes and head out? That will be your mode of transportation, is your feet. But like I said, many of us don't have months and months to take for this trip. And so we'll be thinking about other modes of transportation, perhaps trains, or small commuter airlines, or even buses, public transportation. All of these things can work into your route. When we took our trip, we took almost every type of transportation. We flew to our city. We rented a car for the driving portions, especially in Tuscany. Public transportation is not as good through certain regions, and so we wanted to be able to make stops and go off the beaten path. And so part of our adventure, we rented a car. Not so scary as I thought it was going to be. We did just fine. We used trains quite a lot because they were so reliable and so affordable and very readily available. And then within the cities, we used a lot of public transportation. We jumped on the subways. We jumped on the buses because they're cheap. And, it has the added benefit of you are traveling, you're rubbing shoulders with the people of the community, the nationals who live there, the locals. And it's a great way to immerse yourself in culture when you put yourself into the place of the local residents and travel like they travel and eat where they eat and do what they do. To me, that's one of my highlights about travel. And so as you think of all these decisions, as you're thinking about your routes, you're going to plan in your modes of transportation. All right, just making sure I'm not missing anything on this here. When you're thinking of, let's say you wanted to take a traditional pilgrimage. Let's just talk about the Camino, because many people are familiar with that. The Camino, if you take the Frances route, it can take you 3 or 4 weeks of walking. But now another option would be to take it on a bike. If you biked the route, it would cut your time in half or less. So that's another option, a different mode of transportation, but the same route. You can also bus from stop to stop. That would make it a totally different pilgrimage, but that's an option. Another option is to only take a portion of the Camino. Instead of doing start to finish, You can plan several pilgrimages. Maybe you want to take one every year. Maybe you want to take one every other year, and just take it at a week at a time and eventually get through the whole pilgrimage. All the options are available for you, and you can decide what you want to do. One thing I would say about biking, though, is if you are not a regular biker, don't start on your pilgrimage. Don't just expect to learn to ride a bike or learn how to be on a bike in traffic on your pilgrimage. If that is what you want to do, then I would say spend a good amount of time training before you get on the road, because you don't want to be so immersed in your biking that you're missing your pilgrimage. All right. So just want to throw that out there. Think about how much walking you're going to do. Now, even if you're not taking a walking pilgrimage, if you're taking a train from city to city, you will still be walking quite a bit within that city as you do different sightseeing, as you travel around. Just even just getting a feel for the city, you're going to be on your feet quite a lot. So I want you to consider how much walking per day you feel good doing, and train for it. Get ready for it. That's part of your pilgrimage. I tell you, your pilgrimage is starting right now. This process that you're going through of dreaming, of planning, it is part of your pilgrimage. And I want you to see it that way. And also part of your pilgrimage is training you physically, training your body for it. So begin to take walks, extend your time walking, extend your time hiking, just to get your body strong so that when you go, you are prepared. When Mark and I went, we were amazed at how many stairs we had to climb. A lot of the buildings, your accommodations might not have elevators. So the tip is take only what you can carry without wheels. Many of the streets of Europe, these cobblestones, those little wheelies that you pull behind, those suitcases wheels, don't work on cobblestones. So if you can't carry it, don't bring it. Because I tell you, I was so green. We got an Airbnb, and it said that we were on the 3rd floor. Well, I didn't realize that the Italians count ground floor as 0. First floor is our 2nd floor. So we were actually on the 4th floor of a walk-up, and we had, 80 stairs to climb up and down every time we wanted to go out of our apartment, carrying all of our stuff. So we climbed so many stairs, and that's not even counting where we would visit the sites that we wanted to see. The Duomo in Florence has 476 stairs. There's the Eiffel Tower, there's the Arc de Triomphe, there's Notre Dame, there's, all of these sites have got stairs. And it adds up, and you can get weary. So think about that. Think about how you're going to build that into your trip, how you're going to prepare, how you're going to train your body for your pilgrimage. Moving down here, modes of transportation. Like I mentioned, we took a lot of local and regional trains. That's a great way to see the countryside. When you're driving, I tell you, our experience of driving in Italy, we did it because certain legs of the trip just made sense. There wasn't a lot of transportation into Lake Como area, so we did rent a car, but I tell you, you don't see as much driving your own car as you do taking a train. They drive really fast in Italy. I'm from Hawaii, and we are so laid back culture. We don't go 80 miles an hour on the roads. We go 65 at the most. We're only supposed to go 60, but legally. So I'm not used to that. My husband was driving, and it was pretty intense on those roads. So if you can take a train, you will relax so much more. You will see so much more, and they're through the beautiful countrysides. And like I mentioned, the local buses, the subways. I tell you, the subway system in Paris is so wonderful. You can get to exactly where you want to go. It's quick, it's efficient, it's safe. We always felt safe doing that. And then there's commuter airlines. So on our trip, like I said, we went from Milan to Paris, and that sounds very extravagant. But on these little commuter European airlines, it literally cost us $24 to fly from Milan to Paris, one way. because we were leaving from Paris. Trains are much more expensive than that. And by the time you, even going through TSA, waiting for your flight, coming through, it still saved us time versus taking a train, a local train, and saved us a lot of money. So that's an option that you can consider. So there's advantages and disadvantages. I list those there. Some of the disadvantages of public transportation is you really have to work through the language barrier. But again, it's not overcomable. Google Translate is the best app you can have for that. Another advantage, or something you need to think of, like I said, is the luggage. When you're able to just carry your luggage, you can jump on and off trains, you can jump on and off the local transportation, and it's not a big problem. It's actually such a pleasure to be able to travel with only what's on your back. Such freedom in that. So yes, renting a car was doable. It was really good to have a car out in the open countryside. There are most of the city centers, you cannot drive a car. They are designed only for pedestrian traffic. So you need to be very aware of the places where the boundary lines are for where you can bring a car into the city. Because if you cross that boundary line, they have cameras all over and they're watching you and they will send you a ticket. Ask me how I know. We found ourselves in Siena driving up a street we should not have been on. All these school children were walking, looking at us like, what are you doing here, you crazy tourist? We learned, oh, well, but it's doable. So be aware if you have a car that look really closely at your maps of where the boundary is for the no driving zone, no traffic zones, and you'll be fine. But definitely the bigger cities, Florence, you don't need a car. Rome, we didn't have a car, we did great. Paris, of course, you don't need a car there. So yeah, bigger cities, it's just an albatross, really. You don't need that. But for Tuscany, it was essential. So it depends on where you want to go. All right, now let's move on to accommodation. Accommodations are so fun to think of because where you stay really gives flavor to your trip. Are you going to, there's the gamut. There's the hotel option all the way to the hostel option and everything in between. And it just depends, again, on your why. Are you trying to get away and alone and you want quiet and peace? Then a hotel might be your option because that's a little bit more removed from people, from the crowds. You have your own space. You'll have your own comforts. But on the other end of the spectrum, the far other extreme is the hostel, where you are rubbing shoulders with other pilgrims on their trip. And I saw, there's usually bunk beds, there's communal bathrooms, all of that. And so you really are traveling with people, and you will have the opportunity to meet people, to converse, to share, to learn their stories, and that is fun too. So it just depends on what you're looking for. Kind of a middle of the road is the option that we took most often was the Airbnbs. I love Airbnb, and they are all over the world. And I loved it because you met your host who was a local. You stayed in someone's home, either the entire home, the entire apartment, or even you can stay in someone's home in a bedroom. So you can meet a local family, you can see the way they live, you get great advice, you can ask them questions, where to go, what to do, where to eat, and you get the locals' perspective on that location. So everywhere in between. There's a new option that I am exploring for my next trip, though, and that is to stay at monasteries. Now, if you are wanting to take a more traditional pilgrimage, this is an option you should look at, because usually in the city center, there is a monastery that is active and alive. It's a working, if you will, a monastery where there's still people in the monastic life, but they let rooms out to people traveling through. Now, this is not fancy travel. It's very modest. Usually you just have a bed, a single bed, and a desk and a chair, and you have access to a bathroom. It might be a communal bathroom, just kind of like a hostel. But it will give you the feel of what it's like to have to live a monastic life. And one of the things that I think is the most attractive for me anyway is these monasteries have been in operation for hundreds of years. So you're staying in historic buildings. You're staying usually right in the city center. So the locations are great. The atmosphere is very conducive for a contemplative pilgrimage. Yeah, I'm excited about my next trip. This is the option I'm choosing. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that as we close, but that's an option. And they're very reasonably priced. Many of them come with breakfast. So that makes them even more reasonably priced. So that's an option as well. And I'm going to give you links. You've probably seen them at the end of this guide. I've got links to a website. It's kind of like Airbnb for monasteries. It's called Monastery Stays. And there's a clearinghouse, and they'll help you make the reservations, and they'll be kind of a go-between like Airbnb is for the hosts' places. All right, so that's accommodations. So many things. Again, make sure that it supports your why. If you want to immerse yourself in culture and see the large church, you may not want to stay in a hotel because it will remove you from that purpose. But if you want quiet and peace and solitude, you may not want a hostel because you won't get solitude and peace in that setting. So make sure that your accommodations are supporting your why. All right, activities. This is what will you do with your time when you get to your location, you set yourself up in your accommodations. Now, how are you going to fill your time? So this is especially dependent on your why. There's a full gamut from the busy tourist locations to the out-of-the-way places that you can discover as you walk through a town or a place. I like to do a little bit of both. I like to plan my trip so I have, this was the one that I'm talking to you about. My trip was the first time I'd been to Europe. So there was so much that I wanted to see. Again, I had to remind myself this was not going to be my only trip. I couldn't see everything in every city. Otherwise, I would be running from activity to activity and I would exhaust myself because there's just so much to see. So decide you can't see it all and perhaps pick your activities that support your why. And maybe you can even come up with a theme of your trip, of your pilgrimage. The next pilgrimage that I'm taking is going to be the theme of following St. Catherine of Siena. She is the patron saint of Europe. She was the first woman doctor of the church, deemed by the Catholic Church as the doctor of the church, meaning she had such influence and place that she is elevated as someone that we should know who she is. And I was so inspired by her life. I had read some of her writings before I went on my trip, but then I wasn't paying attention to where I was as far as her life. And I realized that I coincidentally, was following her path of her life. And so this time as I'm going back, I'm going to more intentionally follow the path of her life. And so as I build a theme into my next trip, then that will help me make those decisions of what I will do in each city. Do you want to visit sacred sites? Do you want to look for the sites that have historical significance to your theme? How do you want to engage the culture? How do you want to meet the locals? Maybe you want to build in things that you will purposely meet the locals. Do you want to make sure you hit open markets? Do you want to hit the gardens, the religious services? Do you want to go at a time where there's festivals? Those are activities you can think of that meet your time schedule and your purpose. Think about what bucket list items you can cross off. So whatever you do, research it fully. This is where your research is really going to come in. Most of the tickets, like I say, need to be purchased ahead of time. Things that I did, I wanted to hit those tourist spots, so I knew I didn't want to waste time standing in line. And this is a huge tip for you, because most of those big sites, they'll sell their tickets online and you can pass the physical line once you get there. Things like the Eiffel Tower. If you're going to go up to the certain floors, you have to have a reserved ticket. and you have to get that in advance. My last trip, I was planning in about 3 months is all the time that I had. We decided we want to go. The baby was coming. The day that we thought we were going to be going ended up being our granddaughter's due date. So we had to move everything up, and I had to hurry and get things planned. And I wanted to go up to the top of the Eiffel Tower. That was like one of my big bucket list items. But because of the time that I was planning, we could only go up to the second floor, because the tickets were limited for the higher floors. So you need to know what days you're going to be hitting different sites, and you need to buy your tickets so that you just walk by all the people in line. Another place that's really important is Vatican City. If part of your travel takes you to Rome and to Vatican City, that line very early in the morning snakes all the way around the wall. It's hours and hours long to get in there. But because I had called ahead and I had made reservations with a little tour company, we just met at our designated spot, 9:30 in the morning. The tour guide took our tickets, walked us past all those people in line, took us into the main lobby, took care of all our tickets, walked us right through the security, and then we were on our own. It just was to get into the building. We didn't have to stay with the tour all the way through, although we could have. But, I'm not much of a tour girl. I want to be on my own. So I just stayed with the group until we got in, and then we were free to go through the museums, the Sistine Chapel, and eventually snake our way around to the Basilica all on our own. But it saved us hours and hours of time in line. So as you think about your activities, you're going to think about what days you're going to be in what city, and it just takes a little bit of commitment. So if you don't mind standing in line, if you don't want to plan your trip so much in detail, then you may not be able to do this. But for me, it was important to use my time well, because I only had so much time and I was planning it out. And again, that's the whole reason I got this guide for you, is so you don't miss out because you didn't plan ahead. I just want you to be able to plan as much as you want to, so that you're not taken by surprise, that you can't just walk up to the Eiffel Tower and get to the top. It doesn't happen. And I don't want you to spend all that time and all that money getting to the city and not being able to do what you want to do. All of the major galleries, the museums, they all have advance tickets. And the cities, the larger cities, have general passes that you can explore as well. There's a Paris pass, and there's a Roma pass. Even in Florence, there's a Firenze card. So I have links to those sites in the guide as well. And you just have to determine how many places you want to go if the cost is right. Sometimes it's better to go directly to those sites and buy advance tickets than to get the pass for the city. Because those passes, they have to be used in a certain amount of hours, and they have only certain locations they're good for. So you really need to read the fine print, do your diligent research on those things. Tell you one thing that happened when we were in Paris. I had bought the Paris pass. I had done all my research, except I did not know that the weekend we were going to be in Paris was the one weekend out of the whole year that all the Paris museums are open to the public for free. And my pass became worthless because they were not honoring it. We had to stand in line like every other Parisian. I didn't know that. And I hadn't thought of that idea as in my research. I was researching, how long I could use a pass and where the sites were good for, and weighing the cost if I bought the tickets directly from the site or if I bought the pass, and I had done all that research. But what I hadn't done is what were the festivals happening on the days that we were going to be in town. And I could have saved myself time. My plans were locked in, but I wouldn't have had to buy the Paris pass. It was a total waste. And we ended up having to stand in line at the Louvre. We had to stand in line at the d'Orsay Gallery. Of course, always worth it, but just unexpected. It was one of those, oh, wow. When you travel, you have to come with that attitude of, oh, isn't that interesting? It's not worth it to get upset. We just got to stand in line with a lot of locals. There was benefit to that too. That was fun. Anyway, I just bring that up because there's a lot of research that you can do. Make sure you research the festivals that are happening on the cities on the days you're going to be there, because it might affect the activities that you do. All right. So as far as pacing now, pacing of these activities, you can spend, like I said, going to too much, doing too much will exhaust you. And so what I tried to pace myself is I would get tickets for an activity first thing in the morning. I know sometimes it's hard to get up, but I found that these big cities are much quieter in the morning. It's such a great time to get up early, be the first in line, get your tickets. When we went to Florence, we were the first group up into the Duomo, because once you get up there, you're kind of on your own and they don't monitor you coming back down. So because we were the first group to go up to the dome, we were walking around with only the people who had come on the time that we did. And I don't know how many people they let up at a time, but it was spacious. We weren't shoulder to shoulder up there. So that's another benefit of going early. Now, if we had taken a ticket 2 hours after that, it would have been much different. And we were watching from below. We could see the crowds up above, and it stayed very crowded. Even though you have tickets, you can get up at a certain time. Once you get up to where you're going and walk up all those steps, it might be so crowded you hardly get a good view. And you certainly don't get very great pictures. But because we were the first trip, there was only maybe 10 of us up there at the first batch of people. We could really feel the spaciousness of the activity. It was so I would advise you to be on one of those earliest tours, so that we would start our morning and then we would come down and we would spend the rest of the morning just walking through the city, just exploring on our own. We would have lunch at a local spot, a local cafe, and then we would be ready for our second activity. I tried to plan 2 activities a day. We would go to our second activity and the time when people were maybe just finishing lunch, so there was another break in the ebb and flow of the crowds. And then after our second activity, we would go back to wherever we were staying and take a little nap. We would take a siesta. You need to make sure you build in that downtime. We could just relax and rest. Maybe we went to our accommodations, but maybe we just went to a beautiful garden and spread out on the lawn. Downtime. And then people in Europe especially eat dinner much later than we do in the United States. So we would venture out again once, maybe 7 o'clock even, go have dinner around 8 o'clock, walk around the city a little bit more, enjoy the night lights, and then come back and start it all again the next day. So just a few tips on scheduling your day, not too much. Research is the fun part. So again, here I've got your turn is the research, and this is going to take much longer time than I'm giving you right now, but I just wanted to get your juices flowing. Think about your transportation choices, the things that I've talked about. What sounds interesting to you? Write those down. Think about your choices of accommodation. Where are you leaning towards? Are you leaning toward more of the hotel end? Are you leaning more toward the hostel end, or somewhere in between? And then what kind of activities do you want to do? I'll just give you a minute or so just to kind of brainstorm some ideas. Right? Essential number 5. These are my favorite resources. It's essential that you have great resources. And of all the research that I did, excuse me, there is good information and there's bad information out there. And I wanted to save you a bit of time weeding through the bad information, the things that are just dead ends, rabbit holes, places that just want to sell you a tour or something that you're not interested in. These were my favorite sites. And so for finding flights, I'm just going to run through these quickly. Skyscanner. Skyscanner was a great find, especially for Europe. It consistently found us the best deals in airline. But I tell you, my pro tip is really important. These sites, they keep cookies on your browser, on your computer ID. And so they know how long you've been looking for flights. They know that the longer you look for flights, maybe the more urgent you want to find that good fare. But they also, it just seemed, I don't have scientific evidence for this, but it seemed to me that the longer I looked for a fare, slowly the price would creep up, creep up, creep up, creating this sense of urgency, like, oh no, I better buy this now because the price is going up. The price may be going up, it might not be going up. It's hard to tell. So the advice that I heard that really helped is clear your cookies. Every time you start a new search, clear your cookies so that they don't create this false sense of urgency by creeping up the price, and they're still giving you the best deals available. That was really important. Another site I really like is just Travelocity. There's a lot of those United States-based search engines for travel, but I like Travelocity. I felt like I've always gotten a good deal from them. My pro tip for Travelocity is you can plug in where you want to go, and they will send you notifications when good fares come in. So if your travel dates are flexible, you can have them notify you when a special fare comes down the pike, and you can jump right on it. Now, in that vein, thinking of that is a site called Next Vacay. And what this is, it's actually a membership. And I believe you pay $25 a year. You tell them your home airport, and they will alert you to special fares all over the world. I put it here that the best one I ever found is they sent me an email that said from Honolulu to Sydney, Australia, round trip, $404. That's unbelievable. So if I was able to jump on it, I could do that. And they say, okay, if you need to get on them quick because they do go fast. But if you're traveling during certain dates, it'll tell you when that fare is available. Such a great site. If you have the kind of job where you can just up and go, that's a great membership to get onto, because you can if you don't have a big agenda where you want to go, you just want to go, you just want to travel, they will send you great tips and great airfares that makes travel all over the world possible, especially if you're not coming from the most remote place in the world, Hawaii. All right, now Skitlagged.com is a very interesting site. Skitlagged works on the ideas. They've hacked into the system, the ticketing system of the airlines. And this, I tell you, the airlines actually took them to court over this, but they won. They deemed that what they're doing is perfectly legal, even though it sounds really shady. But what they do is they will show you the routes of the airline trips. Now, for instance, coming from Honolulu, I needed to get to the West Coast to take my transfer to take my European flight. And oftentimes just getting from Honolulu to the US mainland is my most expensive part of my trip. And so what I did is I just plugged in where I wanted to go. I said Honolulu to the West Coast. I wanted to go to San Francisco for my transfer. And so what it did is it brought up a flight that originated in Honolulu and ended in San Jose. But what I did, and what it allows you to do, is you book that flight, but you only pay for the portion of where you want to go. Now, it transferred in San Francisco and went on to San Jose, but what you do is you only pay for that first leg of the trip. And then you just get off, and you don't make your second flight. You don't get back on the plane. So the thing about this is you can only carry your baggage, because your luggage will go to the destination of the flight. But if you have only carry-on baggage, you could just get off at the place you want to get off and move on to your next flight where on another airline, another leg of your trip, or if that's as far as you want to go, you're done. That saved us a lot of money just getting to the West Coast, and it is completely legal. So what they do is you don't book through that airline. They'll send you to the airline that is having that flight. You book it, but you only pay for the portion you're going to actually fly on. It's pretty amazing. And it's totally legal. And they also have a lot of good analytics about flight times, flight fares, how they are trending up or trending down. A lot of good information on that skiplag.com. So I would say check them out as well. And then again, EasyJet was those short little European flights. Ryanair is the same. Great cheap flights between European cities. Right, I don't want to take too much time. We're approaching top of the hour, so I want to quickly get through this. My favorite sites for accommodations, of course, Airbnb. Bookings.com are great for local hotels, and they will tell you how many stars each hotel has. There's good reviews, so you're not going in blind, and they will book it for you at a really good fare or good rate. If you're going the hostel route, there's hostelworld.com you can book through. And then, like I told you before, monastery stays for staying in those active living monasteries all across Europe. All right. As far as attraction tickets, like I said, you want to get those tickets ahead. These are some of the resources for those. And you're on your way. So I hope you've got your travel started in your mind, where you want to go, how long you want to stay, what route you might possibly take, and what activities and accommodations you might work on. Now, this is just whetting your appetite to get started, but perhaps you're saying, well, gosh, this is a lot of work. I'm not really sure I want to do all this research. I want to offer you another option and tell you what I'm doing next. Part of my why for my next trip, my why is I want to share this travel experience with other people. And so my next trip is actually going to be a small group. And I'm taking 7 people with me. My husband and I are hosting. And we're going to take 7 people on my next trip. We're not going to go it alone. Perhaps you want to travel, but you don't have anyone to travel with, and you don't really want to go by yourself. This is what I'm offering. Small group travel, traveling light, only taking a backpack. Yes, you can do it for a 10-day trip in Europe. We're going to take it in Italy specifically. We're going to start in Florence, go on to Siena, and end in Rome. And this pilgrimage will be following the great saint, like I mentioned, Saint Catherine. And we're going to learn about where she lived and what her life was like, and see the sights and sounds of Italy on this trip. So it's like a traveling retreat. And if you are interested, I have that link that if you want to find out more about that, you can take that trip as well. I'm just going to take you to, I've booked this trip, set it up through WeTravel. And if you go to the website, it will take you to all the details of my next trip. So we're going to spend 10 days in Italy. We'll only have 7 of us, plus me and Mark, so 9 altogether. We're going to be staying in those monasteries that I talked to you about in the heart of Florence, right in the heart of the city. We're going to stay in that monastery. We'll have time for prayer and reflection, as well as seeing some of the world's best treasures are kept in Florence. The statue of David, the Duomo, the Uffizi Gallery. There's just so many treasures of the world that we will be seeing there, as well as beautiful gardens, space to just be alone, to even though we're traveling in a group, I'm building in space for you to really make this a pilgrimage where you can have time to journal, time to pray, time to meditate, time to be on your own. So after 3 days in Florence, we'll travel south to Siena. Siena is the city where St. Catherine was born, where she heard her call of the Lord, where she answered that call. We'll see the small cathedral where she worshiped, the place where she lived, the world where she lived in. Now, Florence and Siena were rival cities, and we'll see the big city of Florence, and we'll come into the countryside of Siena, the beautiful countryside of Tuscany, explore those villages, have 2 nights there. And then we'll move on to Rome, where she spent her last days and where she had her most influence. This simple woman who was illiterate most of her life, yet she had such influence even on the popes of the day. And so much so that she is a patron saint. There's a huge, beautiful statue of her right outside the Vatican City. And her influence, even as a woman in the 14th century, is unparalleled, and it's so inspiring. So yeah, we're going to spend 4 days just taking our time through the sights of Rome, through the Forum. We can see the Colosseum. One of my favorite things to do is to rent bikes and ride on the Appian Way, that ancient road, one of the most ancient roads in all the world. We can take bikes and just enjoy a picnic and spend the afternoon on the beautiful Italian countryside of Rome. So anyway, I am so excited about this trip. And if perhaps you want to take your next trip with a small group, I invite you to check it out. I would love to have you with me in Rome, in Italy, in Siena. Yeah, such fun. All right. So we are at the top of the hour. I want to be mindful of your time. Thank you for joining me on this trip through the 5 essentials for planning your epic pilgrimage. And if you have any more questions about it, I'd love to answer those. Send me a message. And yeah, so happy travels. Take that pilgrimage. Begin. You've already begun. Keep going. Keep making those decisions. Push the button. It's so worth it. All right, folks. Aloha.